So, this lesson is going to be all about the different things that you're going to do after you're finished with editing. That's going to be sending the film out to professional colorists, having the sound done by a professional sound mixer, and doing all the visual effects shots. Now, there are some cases where you're going to do some of these things on your own in a vacuum by yourself, and that's totally fine. But we want to demonstrate how that's going to work if you had to work with vendors for each of these three different areas, and what that might look like in your workflow. Now, I'm going to pass things over to Brian for this lesson and the next, so he can walk you through all the details, as this is something that he does often on his projects.
So the first thing you might notice here is that we're actually inside of Premiere instead of Avid. Avid is a great tool for demonstrating techniques and ideas because it is the industry standard tool for narrative filmmaking. However, we know that most of our users tend to use Premiere. And so when we're going to demonstrate something specific and technical, I want to show it in Premiere so that you can follow along almost exactly. Although we are using Premiere to demonstrate these concepts, they should apply to any editing software that you use though. This is a workflow that's going to work for a lower budget, smaller project. In a real Hollywood big budget movie workflow, there will be assistant editors working with complex databasing software like FileMaker. The concepts are going to be the same, there's just going to be a lot more to do on a much bigger budget project. So what I have here is a timeline, and it's just a bunch of garbage nonsense. I took a bunch of random shots from the film, from lessons that we worked on, and just kind of generally roughly slapped them together so that we had a timeline that looked something like a feature-length film. We have some video tracks, we have some cross dissolves, we have some effects. I have a track here with an adjustment layer for some color correction. I have some other adjustment layers like this one to sort of push in on the shot. And I have this one here which has a bit of a glow, a white flash. Then I have my audio tracks, I have my dialogue tracks right here. I have a dialogue track here that has a noise reduction on it for the entire track. Then I have all my Foley and sound effects right down here. This track down here has a reverb on it, and below all of that is the music. Now the important thing about my audio tracks that I set up in Premiere is at the very bottom, you can see I have 3 tracks called _sub. These are submix tracks, and they work very much like adjustment layers, just for audio. So if you go to your audio track mixer here, you can assign specific tracks, like your DX1, DX2, DX3, and so on, to one of your submixes. And in this case, they're assigned to the DX sub. This means that anything that I do on the DX sub will affect all of the DX dialogue tracks. So in that case, if I were to expand my effects rack here and go all the way over to the DX sub, which is this one right here, I can see that it has a multi-band compressor on it for all of my dialogue. So let's begin by talking about the sound and what we're going to do about sending that out to a professional sound mixer. Now, the most important thing to do when you work with a vendor outside of your editing system is to ask them what they want. You shouldn't assume that they want it a specific way because every vendor is going to want it slightly differently. But these are some sort of general rules, and it's great to set up templates for yourself to sort of generally follow these rules because it'll get you there faster. For the most part, most professional vendors will want things in some way that's very similar to what I'm going to show you, but it might not be exact. So it's always good to get a spec sheet or a turnover sheet from them so that you understand exactly what to prepare and how to prepare it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to break your film into reels. Now in this case, it wouldn't necessarily be required because this sequence is only about 3 minutes long and it's only for demonstration. So I'm going to demonstrate how to make reels, but moving forward, we're only going to work in this one sequence to make it a little bit easier to follow along in this lesson. So making reels is pretty simple. The first thing you're going to want to do is take your editing sequence here and duplicate it 3 times. So you have 3 copies of it. Now the number of reels you make will depend on what your vendors are asking for. Typically a reel is about 20 minutes long. So if your film is 90 minutes in length, you could make 3 reels at around 30 minutes in length each. Or if your film was super long, let's say it was 150 minutes, you might make 6 reels, each about 25 minutes in length. For us, we'll just make 3 examples here. So we'll call this one Reel 1. Then we're going to do Reel 2 and Reel 3. Then we're going to open up all 3 of those. Now what I want to do here with the reels is find places to break them up so that there is no overlap of video or audio. Now let me just show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go to Reel 1 here, close that up for us. I'm going to zoom in this section. Now I would not want to break the reel right here because I have some overlap of audio going to the left of the playhead. That is the same on the right side of the playhead. I have some music that's sort of overlapping on the left and the right here. But if I go forward just a little bit in time, right here on this edit point, I actually have no audio on the left side of the playhead that overlaps the right side of the playhead. I could effectively move this all over and nothing would actually be fundamentally broken. This is a really good place to cut a reel. So I'm going to go ahead in Reel 1, just select everything forward to the right and get rid of it. I'm going to unlock my color correction track and trim that as well. This would be Reel 1. Now in Reel 2, I want to come back to where I had cut Reel 1 and remove everything to the left. Now I want to find a place to break into Reel number 3. So I have over here a spot where I can see, just from zooming out, that there is no audio to the left and no audio to the right that's going to overlap. And this fade to white here appears to be just an edit as well. So I can actually cut everything to the right of this, and that would make this Reel number 2. And I'll put that back at the beginning. And I'll go ahead and trim the color correction track here. And that would be Reel number 2. And finally, Reel number 3 is just getting rid of everything to the left of this edit point, deleting it, closing up this gap, and making sure to go ahead and get rid of that extra tail of color correction. This would be the 3 reels. But we're not done yet. The reels need to have their own time code so that they're easily discernible, in addition to being labeled properly, reels 1, 2, and 3, and so on. So the way to do that is to go to reel number 1 here, go to the hamburger menu of the timeline, and choose Start Time. Now what you want to do is you want to set the reel's start time so that the first frame of picture is going to be at the 1 hour mark. So you might say 1:00:00:00, and that would be 1 hour. And you can see here the time code begins at 1 hour. However, you do have to take into consideration that you're going to need some amount of time for the countdown and 2-pop, which is required for sound people. Now a countdown and 2-pop is something you might not have experience creating. It's actually quite simple in Premiere. If you go to a graphics bin of some sort, make a new item, and say Universal Counting Leader, you'll get this option here. You can just choose the defaults and click OK, and then just choose OK right here. And you'll have Universal Counting Leader. Now I'm going to insert this into my timeline. Just going to use an insert edit here. Now that's going to push everything out of the way by about 11 seconds. So now we're at 1:11:00, which means the first frame of picture here is actually 11 seconds too late on the hour mark. So I'm going to go back to my start time here, and I'm going to say 59:49:00. That means that it's going to begin at 59:49:00, but the first frame of picture of the movie will begin at 1 hour. We're going to do the same thing for reel number 2. I'll just insert edit this countdown. I'll change my start time to 1:59:49:00. That means the first frame of picture for reel number 2 is going to begin at the 2 hour mark. And finally, reel number 3. Insert edit. Change the start time. We're going to go to 59:49:00. And we have the 3 hour mark is our first frame of picture for reel number 3. So this is how you would make reels. And as exciting as I think reels are, we're not going to work in reels for this demonstration. It would actually just slow us down, and we're already about 10 minutes into this thing already. So let's go ahead and get rid of those for now. I just wanted to demonstrate how to make them and how the time code should work, because it's something you're definitely going to come across in the future. We just get rid of these for now. And we'll pretend that this entire thing is like its own reel. So now we have 3 areas that we have to plan to send our footage out to. And the first is VFX. So I have identified here in my sequence a couple of shots that are for VFX. The first one right here is a split screen shot from our split screen lesson where we changed the timing of the cashier in the background. The second shot here is this flashback stylization shot that we had in our flashback stylization lesson. So we have that indicated as well. And back here I have a shot from the big fight on the dam where I want to make this blurry and a little bit more orange looking. So you can see here at the top of the frame I have a little text layer that has a bit of information and then a bit of a description of what this visual effect is supposed to look like. Now this shot label right here is going to be something that your VFX vendor should indicate to you how they want their shots numbered and labeled. So you want to refer to them first before making up this code, but generally what you're going to do is you're going to use a 3-digit code that explains the name of the film, in this case Chapman CPM, then an underscore, then the scene number from which the shot is taken, then another underscore, and then a 3-digit number for the actual VFX shot that's being worked on. Now you can see here that I've chosen the number 10, and I didn't just choose that arbitrarily. 10 refers to the first shot in the sequence. The reason that we choose the number 10 is this. So let's just say, for example, I come forward here and I say, you know what? This shot after it should also have the same kind of visual effects as this shot. Let me just copy the sort of rough visual effects. I'm going to right click, I'll do paste attributes, and I'll paste all of my attributes onto it. And that looks pretty good. We get the idea across. I'm going to copy this graphic over, and I'm going to make the next shot 0 to 0. So we're going to skip a total number of 10 between the first shot and the next shot. And the reason for that is this. Let's say, for example, you've already kind of prepped your sequence. You've already labeled all of your shots, and you said, great, this is perfect. Well, adding more shots after this one is not a problem because I can just go 30, 40, 50 if I wanted to. But what happens if I go, you know what? I want to make a shot here that also has that same effect to it. So I can go ahead and copy and paste all the attributes. And I get that same sort of look. And when I go to make my shot label, I'm going to have to choose a number. But if I had chosen 001 right here on this shot, that would mean that the next shot before it would have to be lower than the number 1. And there is nothing lower than the number 1 except for 0. So we choose 10 so that we have 10 more slots with which to add in a new shot. So this shot preceding it, which we didn't previously have marked up, would not have to be called 10. It could be called 005, just like that. This way there's room in between the shots to add more shots if necessary. For example, you might say, you know what, this punching shot right here actually would be better in between these two shots, and I haven't yet given it a VFX tag. Let me go ahead and cut it, move these out of the way, paste it right here, and this needs to have a visual effect as well. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this over, expand it, copy the visual effect over. But we have to give this a number. So we have 5, 10, 20. So this one could be 15. This is why we put gaps of 10 in our VFX numbers in case you're going to be doing some work that will affect the numbering of the shots as you keep working. Now to make this easier, I'm going to get rid of some of these just to cut down on the demo needs. So all we have is shot number 10 here. And let me show you what to do with these shots once you're ready to send them to your VFX vendor. So you would take the shot that you have here, and you're going to want to send it out to your VFX vendor to work on. And you want to send it in the highest possible format, depending on what was shot and recorded in camera and what you're editing with. Now, in the case of Chapman, you just have some H.264 footage to work with, but you might be working on a film with a much higher fidelity camera, like a Red or a Sony Venice or something like that. And you're going to want to choose a format that's going to fit the quality of the camera. And there's a great format for that. Let me go ahead and match frame this up to my source. And I'm going to do File Export. And I'm going to choose under my format settings here, QuickTime. And I'll go to the Video tab. And I'm going to choose ProRes here, 4444. I'm going to say Match Source. I'm going to come down a little bit further, make sure everything is matched down here. When we come down to the depth, I want to choose 16 BPC or bits per channel. That will be the highest quality ProRes format that you can pull out of Premiere to match the source of the recorded footage in your bin. You also want to make sure to change this from the source range being the entire clip to just the clip's in to out points. And this is all you need to export for your VFX vendor using the name right here, CPM_083_010. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now, once you finish the first shot, you want to do that for the rest of the shots in your timeline. So this shot is going to get matched frame up. We're going to do export. Now, you could have saved that as a preset, and I already have that right here, 16 BPC match source for VFX. And then we'll do the same thing. We're going to call this CPM_028_010 and save that. Change this to clips into out points and export. And you would do the same for all of the other VFX shots in your sequence. Now, once you've gone ahead and done that, you want to take note of all these shots. And there's a really good way to keep organized, especially if you need to pay attention to all the shots you've sent out and the status of them. And that's going to be to use a spreadsheet. Now I have a spreadsheet here that I'm going to show you. So I have the 3 visual effect shots labeled on this spreadsheet, and I've already written down the VFX item, the split screen, the flashback stylization, and the sort of memory space when Paul hits Alex. I've given a detailed description of them. I've labeled who's going to be working on them, in this case it's going to be me, and I've labeled their status being as in progress. A spreadsheet like this is a great way to keep track of what you're doing. You can also add a little bit more detail to your spreadsheet by adding thumbnails. For example, you can add a thumbnail of each shot so it's very clear what shot is being worked on. However you choose to do it, it's good to use this as a communication tool with all of your different VFX vendors, as you might not be the only person doing this and you might have several people helping you out. Just like optimizing your editing program, you can optimize your sheets as well. For example, let's take this shot right here. Now you could right click on a cell, come down to conditional formatting, and you can say format the cells if the text contains, and we'll say in progress. So if the text says in progress here, I can change the cell color to something like yellow. Click done. I can add another rule. I can say if the text contains ready, I can change this to a bright green color. And when I change the words in progress to the word ready, the cell will turn green. So this is a great way to keep track of what you're working on. Now, back here in Premiere, we have to talk about getting the sound out of our sequence. So just like your VFX vendors, you want to make sure to ask your sound vendor how they want things sent to them. Typically, you're going to want to send an OMF file, which is sort of the standard way of getting things out of Premiere, but you might also be sending an AAF. They're both really simple to do. I'm going to show you them right now. Now, the first thing with sound is you want to make sure to change the time code of your sequence to make sure that your real numbers all have the correct time code, and that you also have the universal counting leader or countdown ahead of all of your footage. I'm going to go ahead and cut that in right now. I'm going to insert it into the beginning of my timeline. And just for the sound people, I'm going to duplicate the 2-pop and the beep to all of the different groups of tracks. So the dialogue will have it, the sound effects will have it, and the music will have it. I'm going to change the time code so that it's 594900, making the first frame of picture at the 1 hour mark, just like we did for reel number 1. And this should be good to go to send to a sound person. So it's really important that as you were working, you kept things more or less organized. You want to keep your dialogue all in one place. You want to keep your sound effects all in one place. And you want to keep your music all in one place. An important note here is that you can see some of the tracks that I'm using have been disabled, partially because I wanted to put the audio in the noise reduction track. But if I disable them, they won't get sent to the sound person. Since that person is going to do a ton of work on their own, I might go ahead and re-enable all of my disabled audio, just like this. I'll do that for the rest of them now with a shortcut key. This way, your sound designer will have all of the audio available to work with. So now we want to send out an OMF file. You're going to go up to File, Export, and choose OMF. You're going to get this dialog screen here, and this is really asking you some pretty simple questions. First, you can name the OMF file. You can choose the sample rate. 48 is standard. You want to make sure your bits per sample is at 24, and you have to choose between embedding the audio or separating the audio. Now, with a very short project like this one right here, which is only about 3 minutes in length, I'm going to choose embed audio. The reason that you have to be careful about choosing embed versus separate is that an OMF file cannot exceed 2 gigabytes in size. So you can imagine a feature-length film that's about 90 minutes long could get really large. So you might have to choose separate audio depending on the length of your sequence and how much sound you're sending. If you choose separate, it'll ask you what file format to use, and it's typically preferred to use broadcast wave. The last thing to consider is how to render the audio files out. So you can choose to trim them, meaning that the sound mixer will only get just the portion of the audio that's in your timeline with what's called handle frames, which is the number of frames on the left and the right that will be added on top of what's already in the timeline. So if you choose to trim the audio files, you're going to choose how many frames of handles to include, or you could choose to copy the complete audio files. When you trim the audio files, you might want to use something like 100 frames of handles, which is about 4 seconds. And you would click OK and choose where to save that file. The other option is to make an AAF, which is very similar to an OMF, just a different file format. You would do the same process, File, Export, and choose AAF. You're going to get a very similar dialog box. You want to make sure to check Breakout to Mono, Enable. Make sure to uncheck Render Audio Clip Effects and use very similar settings as you did for the OMF, 48,000, 24 bits per sample. You can choose to separate or embed the audio. You can choose whether to use AIFF or broadcast wave, or you can choose to copy the complete audio files or trim the audio files. Either way, make sure to ask your sound mixer how they want it, because it will change how you go ahead and make it. In addition to creating this OMF or AAF file, it's always good to provide a reference video. Now, the way that I like to make a reference video for a sound person is to make a duplicate of my timeline, right-click and duplicate. And we're going to call this underscore for sound ref. We're going to open that up. And what I want to do is I want to move all of the dialogue and all of the sound effects to the left side of the speakers and all of the music to the right side of the speakers. I'm going to go to the audio track mixer. And this is great because we have already assigned all of our dialogue, all of our sound effects, and all of our music to submix tracks. So all I have to do is come down to my submix tracks here and set the pan of the dialogue submix to the far left, the sound effects submix to the far left, and the music to the far right. And that's going to sound something like this.
Wow. God, you just couldn't stand the idea of it, could you? What do you expect from her? She doesn't love you.
So there you go. The sound effects and the dialogue are on the left ear and the music is on the right ear. This is good because then the sound designer can separate those two tracks on their end and use them just as reference with the music separated from everything else. So you want to go ahead and export this. We'll do File Export. You're going to choose QuickTime because Pro Tools tends to favor a ProRes file format. So we're going to choose Apple ProRes Proxy. They're not going to need anything special like a ProRes 4444, just a proxy file format is fine. We'll choose to match source, but you could choose to make it smaller. They really only need something for reference, like 720p, to make the file size a little bit smaller, especially with a feature-length film. And you want to come down to the Effects tab over here, come on down here to the timecode overlay, and check that box on. This way the video will have timecode on it when you export it. This is really important because they're going to use that timecode to make sure everything matches up perfectly when you send over the sound files. You would go ahead and export this as well and provide it along with the OMF or the AAF. The last thing that we have to send out is the color. Now, sending things out for color is by far the most complex part of the process, and it depends on your color house and how they're going to do things. Let me close up this sound reference for a second. And we're going to talk about the ways that you're going to send things out for color. So I'm going to duplicate my sequence here. I'm going to duplicate it twice. There are generally two types of ways we can send things to color. One is shot for shot, and the other is called a notch conform. The result's going to be very similar, but the way that you send them out and the technical things that you have to consider in order to do it are very different. Let me open up both of these timelines here. We'll close up this one just so we don't confuse ourselves. Let's begin with the notch conform. In a notch conform situation, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to send the entire movie as one single flat ProRes video file. Then the colorist is going to cut it up everywhere that there is an edit, and they're going to color it based on that. Then when they send it back to you, it's going to come back as one single ProRes video file. But obviously you don't want to just send it out as is. We've done a bunch of weird random stuff to it. For example, this right here has this text layer on top of it with the VFX shots. We don't want that. Let's get rid of all of the VFX shot information. Additionally, in some places we used adjustment layers to change some of the effects of the scenes. For example, I have a little zoom in right here. So I might go ahead and get rid of that zoom in and let them just color the raw shot. Right here I did some temporary work on the shot to overlap the split screen of the cashier. Let me just disable that so you can see it. So we're going to want to get rid of that. And also keep in mind that this is a VFX shot that was also sent out at the same time. And so you have to be considerate of where you're sending your footage because these things are all going to affect each other. Back here I have some adjustment layers with a bit of a glow and a brightness. I'm going to turn that off as well. And I have this fade to white. Let's get rid of that as well. Now I have this adjustment layer right here, this one. And this just has on it a basic Lumetri color with some color grading on it. I'm going to get rid of my base color grade in my timeline. I don't want to send anything out with any color on it whatsoever. That's all going to get done by the colorist. Now looking at my entire timeline, we have a couple of little things to fix. The first is I want to remove any effects in my timeline that will affect the color of the images. For example, right here, I did a Lumetri color effect to balance this shot out. If I were to turn it off, you could see it's much too bright. turn it back on, I've lowered the brightness of the shot. We're going to get rid of that. Again, this is something that the colorist is going to take care of on their end. Now in Premiere, it's really easy to take care of this by simply selecting all of your shots, right-clicking, and saying Remove Attributes. And we can choose what we want to get rid of. So I want to actually keep all of the motion. So I don't want to remove any of the motion attributes. I also don't want to remove any of the opacity attributes. I'm also going to keep all of the time remapping, so that's any speed ramps that I've included in my shots. I just want to get rid of all the effects, so all the Gaussian blur, all the lumetri color, and all of the tint effects. Click OK, and that should clear out all the effects from my entire timeline. Now, in addition to getting rid of all those effects, I also don't need any of the audio. So I'm just going to remove all the audio here. And I can right-click, I can say Delete Tracks, and get rid of all the empty audio tracks, and all the unassigned audio submix tracks. I can also get rid of all the empty video tracks as well. So empty video tracks. Now I have a pretty plain, basic timeline with only the video in it that needs to be sent out to get color graded. However, there is one thing I'm noticing here, and it's this shot right here on video 2. You can see that what I did is I checkerboarded the cross dissolve. So I have the shot on video 2 cross dissolving in until it's turned on fully, and then the shot on video 1 ends. Now this is actually a pretty good way of working if you want to keep things sort of separated, but it's not good for sending things out to color. You want to make sure that everything is flat on the first video track in order to send things out to a colorist. So we have to go ahead and recreate this cross dissolve as best as possible without messing it up. Here's how I would go about doing that. I'm going to make a cut right here. I'm going to lower this track down. I'm going to make a cut right here. Now I have this cross dissolve. I'm going to double click it. I can see that it is a duration of 519. Click OK. Let's get rid of this entire chunk of video. I'm going to move my playhead over to where that edit point is. This is for snapping purposes. I'm going to move the edit point over to roughly in the middle here. I'm going to apply a default transition, double click it, and type in 519. Now that should actually make things line up pretty perfectly, because once the edit point that we made here gets hit by the cross dissolve, it stops going, and then it moves this way towards the playhead. So this should be a perfect 519 cross dissolve in the middle where it belongs. I can now remove this unnecessary edit point, and we have our video back on track 1 with the cross dissolve in the right place. Everything else in this sequence is looking really good, and so we are ready to send it out to color. What I would do is I would go ahead and do File Export. I would choose QuickTime. I would choose ProRes 422HQ with a match source setting, and export that out for your colorist. I'll do that now. Now, in addition to that video file, they are going to need a way to recreate all these edits. Now, DaVinci Resolve has kind of a nifty trick to detect where the edits occur, just like Premiere has. But it's actually better for you to send them a list of all the edits. Now, you don't want to have to go in here and type all this stuff in, 1 minute, 10904, cut to... You don't want to have to do all that. There is a great way of doing it, though, and it's really simple. All you have to do is this. We're going to do File, Export, EDL. And in this EDL export settings, you want to make sure that the video chooses Edit 1. We don't care about the audio. You want to make sure to include the source file name, include the original video file name, include the transitions, and include the blank events. You're going to go ahead and click OK. Save this in the same spot as your movie file, and make sure to provide both of those to the colorist. Now, the other way to send things out to a colorist is shot for shot. A shot-for-shot export is a little bit more typical of a situation where you're editing in an offline format like ProRes 1920 by 1080 just to be editing in, but the footage was actually recorded in a really high level, something like 8K on a Red or 6K on a Sony Venice or some sort of RAW format that your computer simply can't handle while editing, or that your software can't even import and work with. So the goal here is to send a list of all of the shots as they are to the colorist, who's going to pop them into Resolve and relink to the original footage so that they can work with the raw footage. And then they're going to send it back to you with all of the shots in the same place that you sent it to them. I know it sounds kind of confusing, but it's going to make sense when you see it. So we're going to do a lot of the same steps here. We're going to get rid of all of the unnecessary color correction, color grading, transform effects, text effects, get rid of all that stuff. We're also going to get rid of all the audio. We don't need that either. And we're going to clean up the timeline, so we're going to remove empty video tracks, remove empty audio tracks, and remove empty submix tracks. We're also going to get rid of some of these things that we don't necessarily need to send, like this second layer for the split screen. That's going to be a VFX shot that we're going to deal with a little bit later. We're also going to do the same thing we did in the other timeline. We're going to select all, we're going to remove attributes, but this time we are going to remove the motion and the opacity. The only thing that we want to uncheck here is time remapping. We do not want to remove that just yet. So we want to make sure to remove all of the motion effects, such as zooming in, repositioning shots, changing the rotation. We want to remove all the opacity, such as keyframes to make things fade in or fade out. And we want to remove all the effects. So now we have to actually change the way we did things just a little bit. So in the notch conform, we tried to flatten everything onto one track and make sure that the cross dissolves overlapped between two shots. In this case, it's the exact opposite. We should still be all on one track, but we don't want to have any cross dissolves at all. So this was actually a really good idea to checkerboard the cross dissolve here, because I can simply take this, move it all over, lower this down, and get rid of the cross dissolve. This means I'll have the entirety of this shot to the end of its point, and the entirety of this shot from its very beginning point. You can just close that gap right there. We do, however, have to separate the cross dissolve between these two shots. So we're going to need both shots with their entire amount of footage available. So I'm going to duplicate this one up a track, and we'll duplicate this one up 2 tracks. We're going to pull the first clip all the way to the right to line up to the end of the cross dissolve, and the second clip all the way to the left to line up to the end of the cross dissolve. And we'll get rid of the original 2 clips on the bottom, move this out of the way, and flatten this all back down. The last thing that we have to be considerate of is this shot right here. Now, I did a little bit of time remapping. I thought it was a little bit too slow where the camera kind of cranes up to the treehouse here. So I sped it up at the end. I'm going to just expand the first track here so you can see I have time remapping. So we want to make sure to remove all time remapping, but actually make sure that we get the entirety of the shot that was used, because as it was sped up, it was shortened. So let's make some room for that to happen. I'll just pull this all out of the way for a second. I'm going to take the second keyframe of my time remapping and set it back down to 100%. Now you can see that the length of the clip is now extended. And at the beginning here, this was already at 100%. So now we can remove these unnecessary keyframes. Close that gap. Now this is a good timeline to send shot for shot. There is no time remapping left on the clips, there are no effects, and we have the entirety of every clip available. So what you would want to do here is do File, Export, XML. You'll go ahead and send that out with your other files, and you should be good to go. Now, there is one step that you may be wondering to yourself, wait a second, if I removed all of those effects, and then I get this footage back, and all those effects are gone, how am I going to put those effects back on? Well, if you're thinking that, you're absolutely correct, because we actually skipped over a very important step that I want you to go ahead and backtrack to. I wanted you to backtrack to this because I wanted you to practice this process multiple times. It's good to get in the habit of knowing how to do this, because the more work you do professionally, the more often you're going to be doing this. So we're going to go back to our first sequence here. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to say shot for shot with effects. And we're going to rebuild this timeline right here by removing all of these unnecessary effects, getting rid of all the audio. We'll get rid of things that we don't necessarily need to paste back onto our clips, like this split screen shot here. We don't need this second one because we're going to be getting a visual effects shot back. And we can keep this just how it was because it will tell us the length of the cross dissolve that we need to put back onto our clips. Same with these 2 shots. They don't need to be separated this time. We also have a situation where we have some of these lumetri effects. We can go ahead and select everything here, right-click, remove attributes, and only this time get rid of any effects that are color correction related. For example, lumetri color or tint. So we just want to get rid of the effects that change the color of the image, but we want to keep all of the other effects on our clips. So we'll just remove the color correction effects. And that will make a lot more sense once this comes back in the next lesson. So now, while you're sitting here doing all this work, all of your files are being worked on. The sound mixer is designing all of your soundtracks. The colorist is working on the color, and the VFX team is working on getting all those VFX looking amazing. When we come back, we're going to receive all of that footage back from our vendors, and we're going to put everything back together into one perfectly cohesive timeline that works great for exporting and finishing your film. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at how to bring the VFX, sound, and color back into the sequence once we receive it back from our vendors. So now that all the work has been done on your film, the VFX are completed, the color has been completed, and the sound design has been completed, it's time to take all of those different elements and bring them back together into one timeline so that they all work together and play as your movie is intended. Now, there might be a little bit more work left to do, and I'm going to demo some really complex stuff, not only in Premiere, but also in DaVinci Resolve to show you how those processes actually work. So hang on, because we're about to jump in. So the very first thing is VFX. Now, in our lesson on making a split screen, we did some VFX work in After Effects. And let's just use that as a baseline for what's going to happen in this situation. So you might have sent your shots to the VFX vendor, for example, this split screen shot right here. They're going to work on it. They're going to get it all looking nice and perfect for you. This guy's arm will be doing whatever it was supposed to be doing in that shot. And they're going to send it on back to you in the same format that you sent it out to them. So that would be ProRes 4444 with 16 bits per channel. Now, you might not necessarily need that. It depends entirely on your timeline and how you communicate with your VFX vendor on what the finishing strategies are going to be for this film. So I'm going to make a new bin here in my assets folder. I'll call this from VFX. I'm going to import some files now. So here I have the VFX files that were completed and sent back to me. I have the 3 that were sent out, CPM_028_010, and I have version 1 of that, version 1 of the next one, and version 1 of the one after that. I'm going to drag them in. And with new shots like from VFX, I like to change their color label. So I'm going to right click, choose label, and I'll say AE Dynamic Link or from VFX, whatever you like to call it, but this is the color that I like to use for VFX. So we're going to go ahead and cut those back into our timeline, and they're going to get cut in above the color grade. So right here, we're going to just open this up, drag it in. This is this shot right here. So this is for scene 28, which would be this shot right here. We'll just drag this in right here. Okay, perfect. And then once I drag in a VFX shot, I like to disable the shot underneath it. So we're going to right click and just unenable it. Now I want to take this cross dissolve and make sure that it comes through perfectly. It did because they included it in the VFX. Now I actually have this shot cut into my timeline, which is great, but I want to turn off this little indicator because now that the shot is back in here, we don't need to see this information anymore. Let's go ahead and just turn that off as well. And we'll do the same for the other 2 shots. So we're going to grab 34, cut that in, turn this off, turn off the shots underneath it. And there's our nice perfect split screen from our split screen lesson. And back here, we have this shot. So I'm going to drag this one, cut it in, and okay, something's a little weird here, right? I got this guy in a red shirt, but if I were to turn this off, it's like a totally different shot. So I'm not sure what happened here. Did we miscommunicate with the VFX vendor? Did we send them the wrong footage? So I want to talk about QCing because it's a really important part of the process. Now, I was able to just eye spot this and make sure it looked perfectly, and immediately I knew it was wrong. So we have to talk to the VFX team about what happened, and we might use our spreadsheet to do that, or we could just send them an email. But I'm going to keep this turned on, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the shot that they sent because I know it is just incorrect. But let's look at the other 2 shots and make sure they are actually correct. So this shot right here. I'm going to turn on the shot underneath it again. I'm going to come over to this VFX shot, go to the effects controls, and change the opacity blend mode to difference right here. Now, difference is a great way to tell if things are lined up correctly. This would be for checking out timing or the position or scale of something. Now, it looks pretty good, and you're like, well, what do you mean it looks pretty good? It looks weird. Well, it looks weirder if I were to slide this shot over like this. See, that looks really weird to me because you can tell that with difference mode, any pixels that start to turn black means that the shot that's overlapping, anything underneath it is lined up correctly. Now, in this case, I can see that there's a definite difference between the position of his neck and his ear. That's because this shot is not in the right timing. If I were to begin sliding it over on my timeline, just like this, eventually it will line up. So it's kind of lining up. If I move it this way, oh, right there. So now it's perfectly lined up. And if I were to scrub forward, it's looking really good. I'm seeing a little bit of detail, but this is just because the color is slightly different. So if I were to go ahead and turn this back to normal, and I were to just disable it, yep, that is perfectly lined up. So we're going to turn this back on and turn this back off. And we would do the same thing for this VFX shot. We'll just turn these back on, change this to difference. We can see that the only thing that's really different is the placement of the split screen, but everything else is looking really good. So that's really the only different part, and that's good because they actually did a lot better job of aligning that split screen for us than we could have done in Premiere. So we'll go ahead and turn these off, make sure this goes back to normal mode. And in the case of this shot back here, I've disabled the VFX shot that they sent me because it's incorrect, and I've kept on the little VFX tag as a reminder that this shot still needs to be worked on. I have to send a note back to VFX to change this one. Now, let's just say, for example, it was time to go ahead and send this out for review. Well, you're in a pretty good position to just go ahead and do file export and send this out in whatever format you want for your client or the director to view it, because you have those VFX shots cut into place. So if this is the only step that you've accomplished so far and you want to watch the film, now is a good time to do it. But if you have more stuff that you're going to get back from your vendors, the next thing you want to cut in is the sound. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to make a new bin here, From Sound. I'm going to go ahead and go to my media browser, and I'll go into my From Sound folder here, and grab all the different sound files that were sent to me. Now I was provided with a mix, and then a dialogue stem, a music stem, and a sound effects stem. I'm going to drag those into my project. Now there's a couple of different ways that we can go ahead and do this, but I'm going to show you the most preferred method. So what I would do here is I would right-click on my tracks and say Add Tracks. Now I'm going to say 0 new video tracks. I'm going to add 1 new audio track. I'm going to put it before the first track. And the track type will be standard. That means it's going to be stereo or whatever type of sequence you're working in. In this case, it should be stereo. Click OK. Now I added a new track at the top of my timeline here, just below the video and above the rest of my audio. And I can right-click, rename it, and call it Mix. I'm going to open up the mix here, and I can make sure that the timecode lines up, 594900, just like this, and I can drag it in, just like that. I'm going to zoom in to make sure everything is lined up perfectly, and it looks like it is. The 2-pop, which is right here, lines up across the board, and all the audio looks pretty good. So I can go ahead and just solo the mix track. Now if I were to play this back,
What are you talking about? God, you just couldn't stand the idea of it, could you?
we're going to have a little bit of audio work. Now I might give a note to the sound mixer here that the music is just a tad too loud, but that's for revisions. Now, you might be in a situation where you say, great, this is as far as I've gotten. However, I'm finding that the director in this case likes to tweak things even after we've got some of the sound work back. I mean, the tweaks are very small and minor, but he might want to shave a frame off of a shot here or a frame off of a shot there. That's why it's good to have these stems, because you might not have the budget or the time to make all those changes, send all of the OMF files back to the sound designer, have them redo that work, and then send you back new audio to line up to your new cut. You might have to sort of manually hack those changes in your editing timeline. It's not recommended to do this, but it does happen sometimes. So what I would do in that case is just get rid of this mix track. We'll just delete that track. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add some more tracks. We're going to right-click, Add Tracks. no new video tracks. We're going to say one new audio track before the first dialogue track, and then call it standard. Click OK. We're going to add one new audio track here after the first split. That means before the first sound effects track. Standard. OK. Then we'll just do that again one more time. Add tracks, no new video tracks, and one new audio track after the second split and before the first music track. Click OK. Now we're going to label these. We'll say DX stem. We'll label this one SX stem. And finally, MX stem. And we'll just drag in those stems. So cut that one in. Now you want to do the same thing. You want to go ahead and solo the stems. And you want to make sure to spot check them and ensure that they are in fact lined up. So we can see all of these marks are lined up perfectly, and that means everything is in sync. And now you can see here with the sound effects, for example, I have the sound effects just by themselves, the dialogue just by itself, and the music just by itself. And what I might do is I might just go ahead and relabel these a different color to make it a little bit easier to see. Just like that. No matter which way you cut those audio tracks in your timeline, it should look a lot like this, and it should all sound identical, assuming you haven't changed anything with the volumes, which you definitely should not do. So now you have a version of the movie without a color grade, but with visual effects shots cut into it, and with the audio coming back from the mixer. Now, again, it would be a good time to export it and do a review session, because you might want to offer some feedback on the visual effects shots and offer some feedback on the sound mix. Now, it's really easy, once you've received a version 2 of these files, to simply right-click and say replace footage and swap it with version 2. No need to cut it back in. It will automatically replace itself in the timeline. The same thing goes for your visual effects shots. So right here, I have version 1. When I receive another version of this, I can right-click, say replace footage, and go to version number 2. So now it's time to look at the color. Now I'm going to show you a little bit under the hood of what's happening. While all of this stuff is happening on your end in Premiere, I'm going to show you what's happening on the colorist's end so you understand why we did things the way we did them and then what happens when it comes back to you. This is going to be really technical. So if you feel brave, like you just watched the color lesson and you're like, I could do that, let me show you what's going on so you can know how to get your movie into Resolve. And if you want to play around with it in there, by all means, give it a shot. But it's really important to get this right, because if you don't, you're going to cause some real headaches later on. So here we are in DaVinci Resolve. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the notch conform file that I just exported, which is this right here, and drag it in. And I'm going to make a new timeline from that. So create new timeline using selected clips, and just create a new timeline. So here we have timeline 3, and this is that notch conform file. So it's one single ProRes file with no edits. Now I could go through and I could try to go to each edit point and make a cut. So like right here, this is going to take a while, so we're not going to do it that way. We're going to use the power of that EDL to drive all these edit points for us. So what I would do is this. I would go up to File and Import Timeline Preconformed EDL. I'm going to choose this EDL file right here. And I'll click OK. We'll give the timeline a name. Let's say Notch Conform. Click OK. And we'll say OK to that. Now it's going to make a new timeline called Notch Conform. And here we have all those edits broken up. It gave us an audio track that we don't necessarily need. We'll just get rid of that audio track. And there's this weird extra clip at the end here. That's probably because this shot right here had some time remapping speed to it. So this is just some garbage. We can get rid of that. And now we have a timeline that perfectly resembles the one that we had in our editing system. So if I were to go ahead and go through each shot, on the left side of the playhead is the end of the previous shot. And on the right side of the playhead is the next shot. And the same thing here at the end here, we go to the left is the previous shot, to the right is the next shot, and that should work perfectly. Now we want to go ahead and QC and spot check all of this to make sure it's right, including things like cross dissolves. That's looking pretty good as well. So you want to make sure to check everything, but you are pretty much good to go to hop into the color suite. You have all the shots individually broken up here and do the color work that you want to do. Like, for example, we can just make the shot super bright, super weird looking, make it red, and hey, Looks great. I've gone ahead and done this for the entire timeline so that we can demonstrate bringing it back into Premiere. So that is one example of what's going to be happening in the back end of Resolve. Let me show you what's going to happen if you used the shot-for-shot XML. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of this stuff here. So now back in the media pool here. So now I'm going to bring in the XML file. Now I don't need to bring in any footage first. The XML file is going to bring in that footage for me. Now it's either going to bring in the footage from my hard drive that it's specifically linked to, like in your case it would be the MP4 files, or if I was a colorist and I had raw footage to relink to, it would bring in the raw footage depending on how I set this up. Now since we don't have that, I'm not going to demonstrate that. It's a pretty complex process to get right. For us, all we have to do is do File, Import Timeline, Import XML. And we'll navigate over to that XML file right here and click OK. And we'll leave all the default settings checked and click OK as well. And it's going to make a timeline that is exactly the one that we sent to it with no cross dissolves, no time remapping, no speed ramps, no effects, no nothing. And here we have a perfect timeline that we can go ahead and do our color correction work on. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of stuff to this really quickly. Okay, so we have a really weird, dreamy looking movie now. It looks weird, but you know what? There you go. So now we want to go to the Deliver tab, which is all the way on the far right here. And we have a bunch of options to consider. But DaVinci Resolve is great about giving us one option that's really going to help us out. If you scroll to the right of this list right here, you're going to see Premiere XML. Go ahead and click on that one. And it's going to do pretty much all of the work for you. You can choose to shoot out ProRes 422 or 422 HQ. You can choose whether to render at 1920 by 1080, or if you had a higher resolution footage, you can choose to render at source resolution. Under audio, it's not going to matter. There is no audio for these clips. And under file, this is really important. It's going to say use unique file names with a prefix, which means that there's going to be a number before the file name that is unique so that there are no two files that are identical. So now all we got to do is choose a render location, browse, and add a render queue, and render this out. And after watching it render, I could say what a weird looking movie that's going to be. So let's head back into Premiere. Now we have two things to bring in. We have to bring in the XML and the notch conform. I'm going to make a new bin here from color. The first one we're going to bring in is the notch conform. And that's going to be this right here. We'll just bring that back in. And here's some crazy color work I did to the notch conform. It's very bright and weird looking and dark and green. And so that's our contrast, so we can see how things work. Now, the notch conform is just one single ProRes file all the way through. And because we flattened the timeline and removed all the effects, we should be able to simply drop it back into our edit timeline without things being super weird. I'm going to make a new video track above all of our base color correction. I'll add a track right here above the adjustment layer and just drag this in. I'm going to drag this into the first frame of picture right here because we didn't send it with the countdown. And so right here we have that notch conform dropped back in on top of everything. And we can do the same process that we did with the VFX. We can go over here, go to the effects controls, and change the blend mode to difference. This way we can make sure that everything that got sent to color came back exactly as it's supposed to. All the edit points are in the right place, like this. Looks great. And just to show you an example, if I were to just slide this over a little bit, things would look really weird. We would see things are definitely incorrectly lined up. But since they are lined up perfectly right here, everything is good to go. We can also make sure that our repositions are also being affected. Let me just turn this off of difference mode for a second. So we put this underneath this adjustment layer, which was doing a transform effect, scaling up and changing the position. Let's play that back. So that kind of came back in exactly as it was supposed to because it was an adjustment layer above the footage. Now there is one thing to pay attention to. The VFX shots didn't get included. So we can do one of two things. We can either turn them off for the time being and turn back on this tag, or better yet, we can send just the VFX shot to the color vendor and ask them to independently color it for us and then drop it into our timeline right here. It totally depends on your relationship with the color vendor, the relationship with your VFX team, and how much time or budget you have available to do all of this. It's of course best to have all the VFX done before you even touch the color. But in some cases you don't, and you have to kind of go back and forth between the two. So this is what a notch conform would look like. It's pretty easy to bring back into Premiere, but it doesn't offer you a lot of flexibility. All we have here is one single ProRes file. If we wanted to make changes, we would have to go ahead and cut this up on every edit point, find those points to make the changes. It's not as adaptable as something like a shot-for-shot color correction. Let me go ahead and get rid of this for a second. We're going to open up the shot-for-shot with effects. I'm going to open that up. Now this was the sequence that we sent over to color. I'm going to come back to my media browser, go to the XML folder, and then grab the XML file and just drag it into my bin here. What this is going to do is it's going to bring in a bin full of files with a sequence with those files having been colored. Let me go ahead and double click this. And there it is, all of our crazy color. Looking really weird. But it is a flat timeline. It's missing all the effects and things that we wanted to do to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this. I'm going to paste it a couple of tracks above the video in this sequence here. Now the timing is definitely off. That's because we have to reapply some of the timing from our other shots. So, for example, this first shot here is the universal counting leader. We can move this right here to line up to the first shot. Now, the first thing that's an issue is that this very first shot right here had some time remapping. So I'm going to go ahead and copy. Then I'm going to right click on this one, paste attributes. I'm going to paste the time remapping and uncheck the motion for now. So all we care about is the time remapping. Click OK. Now that's going to bring things back exactly as they should be. If I were to bring this shot into my effects controls and change it to difference, things should look pretty good as I scrub through it now. So it's getting slightly off, and that does tend to happen. You can kind of sit there and try to finagle it to make it exactly perfect. Or if it really mattered and it had to be exactly frame accurate, pixel perfect, you could send this shot as is, export it just as one individual shot, and have the colorist work on it as a completely flat ProRes file. So that is an option if you absolutely need to, and the remapping doesn't translate perfectly coming back in. Now, let's look at the rest of the shots. Since we changed the timing of the time remapping shot here, if I were to drag all these back into place and line them up, they should start to line up really nicely. For example, this one right here, if I change it to difference, looks pretty good. Now I can go ahead and copy and just paste the opacity. That'll put difference on all of my clips. We can go through, get them to line up nicely. Now, of course, we have this cross dissolve, so we have to recreate that. I can just copy the cross dissolve, paste, just like that. And we're kind of recreating all the same things from our original sequence. Now you might say, oh my gosh, why would I ever want to do it this way? Well, this way gives you the most control. You have all of the shots back in place. And if you were doing this in a much higher resolution, you'd have them at a very high resolution. You could have them in 4K, 5K, 6K, 8K, whatever your camera resolution was. It gives you a lot more latitude to work on the cut if you need to. It's also a workflow that is more benefiting of somebody working by themselves. So if that person is you and you are working by yourself in a vacuum with just you, Premiere, and DaVinci Resolve going back and forth, this is a method that's actually going to be a little bit better. Because if you were to say, I'm going to go ahead and remove difference for a second. This shot, for example, I say, I hate the color for this one shot right here. I can go back into Resolve. I can go back to the color tab. I can find that one shot right here. I can do a bunch of work to it. Let's just say I really want to make it super specific, right? So this is what it's supposed to look like, this weird magenta color. And I can come back to my Deliver tab, just select this one shot and say render this clip. Then say add to render queue and render it out. I can replace the existing file. And when I hop back into Premiere, that shot's immediately updated, and only that one shot is affected and not the entire timeline. So it's a much faster workflow, again, if you're going to work by yourself in a vacuum. But if you're not, and you're going to work with an outside vendor, the other color method might be more preferred. Now I would go through the rest of this timeline, realigning every shot, getting these cross dissolves perfectly lined up again. I would also go through and make sure that all of my effects translate back over. For example, I think over here, I have a Gaussian blur. I'm going to copy this clip right here. I'm going to paste it onto the clip that it belongs to, 83K-01, which is this one right here. Right click, paste attributes, and make sure to reapply the Gaussian blur and uncheck the opacity. Click OK. So there's the Gaussian blur effect. So I would go through and make sure everything that's lined up on top of itself is perfectly lined up with the effects that it needs to have to keep working in my timeline. Now we're going to skip this for now. This might be too much work for us to do in our situation, but I wanted to show you what might happen if you went this route. So let's go back to the notch conform. I'm going to change the color of this clip just so it's easier to see. Okay, so now we have kind of a perfect timeline ready to be exported. It has the color, it has the sound, it has the visual effect shots. It's got everything it needs to be sent out for a full review of the entire movie. So that's it. You pretty much have everything you need. Now, you might do revisions. You might get alternate versions. You have to cut in new versions of things. You might have to send out notes for review. But at this point, the picture is locked. The cut is done. And all you're focusing on are these three specific areas: visual effects, color, and sound.